As we know, agility is a hand-me-down from IT. Its successfulness led us to apply it to other contexts also in need of a radical improvement as well, such as business. However, we don't have a very clear definition of what business agility really means. And Evan is here to tell us why that is a good thing, and how business agility can be the force of significant guidance when dealing with uncertainty. Joining us from Melbourne, Australia, Evan is the founder and CEO of the Business Agility Institute and an accomplished executive and writer. He's here to tell us 4 stories about how multinational organizations work successfully with business agility. Please give him a warm welcome.
There it is. Good morning, everybody. How are we? Good? Yes, fantastic. All right. I promised I'm going to do this. All right, everyone, hands up. High five. There we go. I'll put that up. Certain uncertainty. This is the topic of great importance to most of us today. Companies around the world are struggling to adapt to a disruptive market environment. Now, disruption's a term that's overused, right? But it's still a valid term. It has meaning, it has truth behind it. Now, we've always had a disruptive market. Companies have always had to earn the right to exist in, well, how they operate. There is no too big to fail. But what we've found in the last, let's say, 30 years, is that the level of disruption, the level of organizational change is accelerating. This is a quick look at the Fortune 100 companies in the United States from 1983 through to 1993, through to 2003, and all the way up to 5 years ago in 2013. In a span of 30 years, 57 of those 100 companies no longer exist. They've either gone bankrupt, some have emerged from bankruptcy, but not all. Some have been acquired, some have gone through a merger, and some have just faded into insignificance. These are the biggest, literally the biggest companies in America, or were the biggest companies in America. Another study, Business Week, the magazine, this is back in April, reported that Chapter 11 bankruptcies, once again in America, were up by something around 60% over the last 10 years. So if you're thinking about organizational survival, then we have to acknowledge that today, businesses are going to be challenged. Now, we talk about agile from an IT setting, but I want you to put its IT heritage aside, or in fact, its manufacturing heritage aside if you want to go back to the 1940s. And I want you to think about agility from your customer's perspective, because the customer is who we're in business for. About a year ago now, I was going to hospital for some minor surgery. And when I went into hospital, I'd written a blog post, just a quick, this is what I think business agility is. And before I went into surgery, I put that online and I said, hey, I'm about to publish this blog post. It's a Google Drive document. If you have some insights on what business agility means, then add a comment and I'll try and incorporate it before I publish. This is 500 words, 600 words. Well, 8 hours later, I'm out of surgery. And of course, what's the first thing you do when you come out of surgery? You check your email. So I got my computer, I checked my email, and we had about 60 people who are having an active debate over Google Docs comments about what business agility was. And this was really inspiring to me because not only it meant that we were onto something, but it meant that there was no single answer. So what we did is we took this idea, this blog post, and we turned it into what we call a model, the domains of business agility. Now, the reason we built a model rather than a definition, we could have given you business agility is the ability for an organization to adapt to a changing marketplace. There we go. But that's so vague as to be completely useless. Right? Every company needs to adapt. There's nothing special about business agility in that. So what we said is we said, okay, these are the characteristics. It's not a framework. It doesn't tell you how to do it. I call this the don't forget model. Because if you're going to build an adaptable, agile organization, these are things that you can't forget. Now, I'm going to spend the 30 minutes or so I've got on stage here to outline what is it that you can't forget. When you're designing an organization, what does that look like? I'm also going to share with you some insights from some research that we've done over the last year around companies around the world who are adopting these mindsets. So what is the model? It is a series of 3 dimensions, 9 domains, centered around the customer. The customer was a challenge for us because everybody was asking, why the customer? Why not employees? Because they're the most important people in our business. Or what about shareholders? They own the business. Right? They're important too. But after much arguments, and of course this is happening over the internet, so people like arguing over the internet, we settled on the customer because they are why you're in business. They're not necessarily the most important part of your business. They're not even necessarily it's not going to change how you run your business. But it does change the way you think about your business. There's an author, one of my favorite authors, called Frederic Laloux. He wrote a book called Reinventing Organizations. It's not perfect. It's a very rosy vision of what an agile organization looks like, but it's very succinct and it's very clear and it's got a seductive simplicity. And he says in his book that profit is like air. We do not live to breathe, but we do need to breathe in order to live. And that's the point. Think about your balanced scorecard. Think about your KPIs. Think about your OKRs at your organization. I guarantee that all of them, or most of you, it's about financial health of your organization. And don't get me wrong, that's important, but that's not why you're in business. You probably have one entry in that scorecard around customer satisfaction, but here's a question. Who gets fired if customer satisfaction is low versus who gets fired if you don't hit your revenue targets for that quarter? Right? I guarantee you that one is weighted much heavier than the other. And this is what's happening in organizations around the world today, is that we have spent the last 30 years focusing on efficiency, focusing on revenue and growth to the exclusion of customer. And to go back to our nice animation, what do most of these organizations that have failed have in common? Bad luck, certainly, but a lack of customer focus. Right? Because the customer had a need. They had a service that they wanted that this organization could no longer provide, or that another organization could provide better. We all need to eat, we all need to buy cars and houses, we need to buy fuel, right? But these organizations who were building cars and cameras and all those things that we use were outcompeted by someone else who had customer at the center. Over the last 12 months, we've been running a series of research programs, one of which was a survey on business agility fluency. And we interviewed 400 people, 166 companies globally, and we asked them to rate their organizational maturity, their fluency on business agility. Overall, it's pretty poor. Right? Now, these aren't ordinary companies. These are companies who are self-described on the journey. Right? So you'd expect them to have a higher level of fluency than a baseline company I find on the street. But the answer is it's a little bit higher, but not that much. Right? Organizations around the world are only just getting started. Right? 4.9 out of 10. 7 plus is good, 7 minus is poor. Right? So we have a long way to go as a community. So, I've already talked about that. I'm going to ask you a question. Everyone, pull out your phones. Right? I want you to go to this URL, polev.com/bizagility. And we're going to run a question. This is one of the survey questions that we asked. How would you rate your organization's maturity in measuring what matters, your KPI, your corporate scorecard? Right? The first answer, weak, pre-crawl. You measure simple measures, easy measures, velocity, all right, revenue. You go a bit higher. You've removed what we call vanity measures, measures that if you change them would have no impact on the organization whatsoever. All right? So you're now starting to focus a little bit more on what's important. Walking, soft measures, staff satisfaction have the same focus and attention as hard measures, revenue and profit, which means if someone gets fired for revenue, they get fired for staff satisfaction as well. You're running. This is where you're starting to look good. Right? You incentivize and measure transformational activities. So it's not just run the business, but you're measuring change the business as well. Flying. Right? This is what a true agile organization looks like. We have measured our organization on why we exist, not what we do. Think of it in terms of a project. I don't care what the project delivers, if it delivers on the value, on the outcome that we want as an organization. And, well, some of you, fantastic. Right? This is about what I would expect. A little bit more in the fly. The people who rated fly, come and talk to me afterwards because I want to know why. All right, this is good. What you're seeing here is a fairly European view, and this does roughly match to what we would see from the global report. A few people in the high range, most up in the weak and low ranges. All right. So let's look at the first dimension, ways of working. I'm going to be pretty quick about this. Who here actually knows what Agile, Scrum is? Yeah, all right. So ways of working is literally how you work in an agile way. Right? We have technical agility, which if I'm a software developer, that's easy. That's I'm going to write code, XP, DevOps, TDD, all those sort of wonderful things. But if I'm an accountant, I can still have technical agility beyond budgeting. And if I'm HR, if I'm working as an individual in an agile way, then I have technical agility. Process agility is your value streams. It's your processes in the organization. It could be a marketing process. It could be a software development process. It could be a budgeting process. What level of agility do you have in your work processes? And the last one is enterprise agility. So whereas we think of process agility as a value stream, enterprise agility is now looking at the end-to-end organization. Right? Do we have agility in finance? Do we have agility in HR? Right? And I'll give you a good example. So there's a large healthcare organization. Yeah, I am being recorded, so I can't say the name. But there are large healthcare. Talk to me afterwards. I'll tell you who they are. There's a large healthcare organization who were adopting a practice called beyond budgeting. Now, one of the things that they were trying to do was move away from. They were developing healthy eating programs. Right? And they'd been using some process agility in that. They'd adopted Scrum in their product delivery teams. This wasn't software. This was literally healthy eating programs. But when they looked at how the organization was working, there was a severe limitation. Because what was happening is they were budgeted for 12 months at a time. And the programs, because they were iterating, because they were changing their work, would often go in different directions to what was originally budgeted. But finance, the CFO, wouldn't allow that. We have funded you to deliver this project. But that project doesn't work anymore. That's not what the customers want. We need to adapt. And no, you're funded for that project. Your KPIs are measured on that project. Your bonuses are measured on that project. So what do? They deliver the project. And of course, the customers go, that's not what we wanted. They don't sell as much. They don't have as much benefits and ... So when the organization realized that this was the mentality and the culture that was happening, they said, all right, let's shift this. We're going to embed an enterprise agility. Right? Finance, you now need to support agility in not just how the product development teams are working, but in the way that you're working as well. Right? We're going to adopt rolling budgets. Right? We're going to adopt value measures as opposed to project measures. We're going to continue to change the way that we fund and the way that we deliver value, such that we deliver what is important, not what is agreed. Next question for you. How would you rate your organization against managing a value stream? Think about it. Right? This is in process agility. Okay? Number one, the majority of your teams don't use any sort of agile. They're just traditional work, plan, work. Next level, all right? You have modeled the customer value stream, right? Which is where the creation of value occurs, but most of your processes are still governed by functional demands rather than the full value stream. Next level. Who is this fly company? I want to know. I want to know who you are. All right. You have introduced flexibility into your work. So that means that if I have a process that's of low risk, if it fails, doesn't matter. We are now able to be flexible in that value stream. We're now able to make changes. There we go. Running. Running is where all of our work, right, or at least most of our work processes, are based and structured on the customer view of value rather than the team silo. Another example, so this is DBS Bank in Singapore. I can say their name. And they have been structuring their teams around what they call platforms of work. They're funding platforms rather than projects, which means the work comes to them. And the reason they fund like that is because that's the customer view. Right? The customer don't care about this particular thing. Right? They care about the experience that they have with that bank. Right? Another example from DBS, they revamped some of their business processes. The I've lost my credit card process. It's a great process, but here's the problem. Right? Customer satisfaction was low, great. They do design thinking, they look at the customer, they change it, they make it more human. It's no longer, give me your name, rank, and serial number. It's, oh, look, I'm sorry to hear that. Have you filed a police report? Can we help in any way? Oh, and by the way, we do need your name, rank, and serial number before we can proceed for security purposes. So a more human approach. But guess what they did then? They called the customer up. They said, you've just been through our new wonderful lost credit card process. Right? How did you feel? It's like, great, it was fantastic, but where's my debit card? Because they hadn't lost a credit card, they'd lost their wallet. Right? And this was an aha moment for DBS when they went, the line of business, the credit card process wholly existed within the credit card line of business. Right? So, but the customers don't care about our lines of business, they care about I've lost my wallet. So now they have process value streams which go, we will deliver, we will design our processes against the value stream. You've lost your wallet. That's a customer journey, an experience that you're now going to go on. And using those same humanistic views, we will cross the organizational boundaries for you so that you don't have to raise 3 different requests. I've lost my credit card, my debit card, change my PIN, ... This is interesting. This I was not expecting. I don't think I've actually ever seen any group of people who have this gap between fly, like really good and pretty poor. So it's interesting. So while we're talking about different business functions, one of the pieces of research that we did was on the impact of different business functions. Right? We can say pretty much categorically that if you're changing the way that your technology and your product teams are working, then great, so is everybody else. Your actual fluency, your ability to be resilient in the market's pretty low. But you know what? If you change finance or HR, even though these two are the smallest, and they have the fewest organizations running these kind of changes, they have the biggest impact to your organizational fluency. And this is an aggregate across the world. When we dive into some of these organizations, in certain industries, that distinction is much more stark. In banking and finance, as well as in manufacturing, when we look at finance, if that's transformed, it's got a huge benefit. So when we think about business agility, you've got to think about your entire as was mentioned at the beginning with those lovely circles, businesses are complex adaptive systems. You can't change one part of the system and expect that that the benefit will occur. And this is where agile transformations, or in fact any kind of transformation, has failed for the last 30 years, because it's not about that transformation. Right? You're going to touch 3 parts of the organization, great, what about the other 10? If you can't slowly and incrementally transform the entire organization, right, then the benefits that you're being sold on aren't going to be realized. Connections. The connections dimension is the one that people miss the most. Leadership agility, servant leadership, the ability to delegate. Structural agility. Everyone loves a restructure, at least every consultant does. Right? But I will say, in my experience, culture follows structure. So an organizational culture is, if you have a siloed organization, you're going to have a siloed culture. If you have a collaborative organization where everyone who touches a value stream is in a single team, rather than the value stream jumping from team to team, is going to have a much more collaborative culture, a much more dynamic and customer-focused orientation. Singapore Press Holdings did a really interesting thing where they're in their digital media. Singapore Press Holdings, they do the Straits Times and other newspapers and TVs and all that sort of thing. But in their digital space, they went, okay, we're going to build these cross-functional teams. We're going to bring them together, right? And we're going to be customer-focused. But do you know how that expressed? The developers and the teams created a new product. I actually, for the moment, forget what it was. It was something on the iPhone. And the developers and the teams said, we need to test this. We need to get customer feedback. So without asking permission, without going through the process or the bureaucracy, they went down to the local MRT station, the local train station, and literally just went, hi, I'm from Singapore Press Holdings. Can I ask you a question about our new product? These weren't marketing. These were the team doing the work. Right? And because they had that customer focus at the center, because they were cross-functional, there was no other handoffs required. They could make that internal decision just to go and ask people on the streets for that feedback. That's structural agility. And then market agility. Market agility is your supply chain. It's all well and good to transform an organization, right? But what about your suppliers? What about your distributors? How are they operating? Because they're the ones often talking to your end users. Do you get the feedback cycle from them? Your vendors, you have a contract with them, right? Is that contract supportive of an agile way of working? Is that contract supportive of changes and variation on a daily basis? Or do you have to go through a contract variation request process that takes 3 months, and by then you've already slipped on what you're needing and the opportunity that was available in the market is gone? Right? If you do not have market agility, then you're missing the ecosystem view. Another question. How would you rate your organizational fluency against autonomy and delegation? So think about leadership. Right? This is leadership agility. Leaders push work through the team, which then needs to go through complex and multi-layered approval cycles. I used to be a public servant. I used to work for the government in Australia. And the leaders in those organizations treated their underlings as just extensions of their arms. Right? We would write a brief, and it would have to go up the layers, and every single one of them would make their comments and back down and back up and back down, until finally, through consensus, someone would agree that, yeah, that's good enough to go to the minister. And we would spend months writing a 3-page document. Right? And people think governments are inefficient. Yes, they most certainly are. But partly because of how the leaders work. Right? Crawling. Leaders delegate work to the team with clear expressions of how they're going to deliver it. Right? So delegation, but delegation of do this and this is how. Operational decision making is localized. What does that mean? It means that as a team, within a certain remit, I can make decisions about my work. This is a very European set of answers. Love it. Leaders do not focus on the work of their teams, but rather team autonomy. I had an interview with an Israeli major, a major in the Israeli army, and she was saying that, well, an ex-major, she's retired. She was saying that there were two things that a leader needed to have. Number one is the ability to set a vision and a goal. And number two was the ability to create a culture. Create the team and the dynamics within a team so that you can trust that they can deliver on the outcome that you set them. So the goal is, go arrest this person. The culture and the skills are, well, you've been training for months to be able to do this. Now, we've selected the right people, the right structure, the right culture, so that you can go and do it, you can learn from each other, you can learn from your mistakes. Where this is missing in the corporate context is the role of management. We talk a lot about leaders, and leaders are important, but so is management. So is the ability to direct and govern an organization. So do not think that business agility is all about fuzzy leadership. Right? There's also a very clear, how do you actually develop the skills? How do you actually manage that team to get an outcome that you're looking for? There's inspiration, there's also that management side that's critically important as well. This is much higher than the global average. The global average was definitely sitting around crawl and walk. You're sitting around run and fly, or run and walk. So what we do find is that there are cultural differences. When we look at the Nordic and Scandinavian countries, leadership is a lot better than if we look at, say, the Russian or the Indian, or for that matter, the American organizations. This was an interesting insight that we had. When we look at an organization, different organizations will have different perceptions of business agility. So inside the organization, whether you're a CEO or whether you're an individual contributor, you're within about 0.5 of a point from each other. Right? So pretty close, just sort of within statistical insignificance. Yet, when we asked outsiders from that organization, vendors or consultants, to assess the business agility, they're about 1.5 points lower on average. Right? So business agility is also a perception necessarily more than it is a reality. So one of the recommendations that we have for organizations is, if you're going to transform yourself, get some external insights into what works for your organization and how it works. Leadership is also critically important here. When we look at who's leading the journey, right, it's a linear trend. It's very clear. Organizations whose transformation is led by the board and championed by the board far outperform organizations whose transformation is led by a line of business leader. Right? So if I'm the head of talent management and I'm doing a transformation, then my ability to change the organizational culture is limited. Right? If I'm the chairman of the board or chairwoman of the board, then I can change a company. I can change a culture. So I run the Business Agility Institute. We're an independent association for these organizations, agile organizations. One of the areas that we strongly focus in is transforming boards. We don't do consulting, we don't do training. Right? We have a library, we do events, we do outreach. Right? But with boards, we have a little bit more we have a little bit more of a hands-on role with boards than we do with the rest of the organization. And partly because we're independent. We're never going to sell anything to their companies. Right? And when we go talk to these boards, they want something different. They're the owners of the business. They've never heard of design thinking. They've never heard of agile, right? Or nothing more than they saw in Gartner or in Forbes. But they do want agility in their organization. They do want customers to have pride in the brand. And so when we start talking about customer-centric organizations, they're like, why aren't we one already? And the sad truth is most organizations are not. New Zealand Post Group is a really interesting organization. When we talk about something like leadership agility, what they did is they sort of went a step further. They created what they called a sorting room. Right? Now, let me take a step back. The way New Zealand Post Group started was like any other like board and executive team. They would meet once a month. There would be a stack of papers. So if you wanted to present to the board, you would request a slot. You'd be given a slot, then you'd have to prepare the board papers. You need to give them to them so like 2 weeks in advance so they could read them and review them. And then they'd be just half a day to a day of just presentation after presentation. The board members weren't paying attention by the third hour. Hell, they were barely paying attention by the first. Right? So it really wasn't effective. So what they said is, let's change this. Right? We're going to meet weekly, not monthly. We're going to discuss 2 issues, and only 2 issues, and everything's going to be on the walls. Right? So yes, post-it notes on the wall. It's a part of this culture that we exist within. But literally every single organizational initiative is on those walls, right? And it's public. Well, not it's open to any employee. I could be a postie, someone who delivers mail. I could be a bank clerk. New Zealand Post Group has a bank as part of its group organizations, a courier business, a postal service, and so forth. Right? So I can walk in and I can see every strategic initiative, who's owning it, where it's at, what it's doing, and they have different things on every single wall, different information radiators. My favorite is on the door, they have a picture of an elephant. Right? So there's a saying, the elephant in the room. Right? And anyone in the organization can put a post-it note on that elephant, and it forces the board, forces the executive team to talk about that topic. It could be about culture, it could be about delivery, it could be anything. Right? But it's the elephant in the room that no one's discussing but really should be. Right, so this is the kind of thing. Now, you might find this, there are other people who are doing similar things, might called enterprise visibility rooms. There are all sorts of different ways of approaching this. New Zealand Post Group was like the first company I know of that did it. This case study that I did is now 8 years old, I think. So this one's not a new one, but there's examples from Vistaprint, there's examples from Amex, there's examples from companies all around the world. The last one, the mindset dimension. 3 domains: a learning mindset, a growth mindset, the ability to see failure as a learning opportunity, the ability to make an experiment, take a hypothesis. We're going to try something. I don't know if it's going to work, but we're going to give it a try. A collaboration mindset, right? Where if you've touched something, you own it. Right? Where when I have the accountability to work with my colleagues. It's not, oh, yep, no, I've done my part, it's over with Joe over there. Right? It's over with Benji. Benji's going to make sure it happens. So don't talk to me anymore. It's not my responsibility. Go talk to Benji. That's not collaboration. That's siloed thinking. Right? Not my problem. Whereas a collaboration mindset is, let me help you. I'll go figure out where it's at. We'll work together. We'll make something happen. Then lastly is an ownership mindset. And that comes in different ways. Right? Pride, accountability. But the way I like to think of it is a simple question. Does everybody in your organization take personal ownership, personal accountability for the financial health of your organization? If I come to work and I just do my job and I go home and I really don't care about whether the company is successful. I care as much as I get to keep my job, right? But if I don't care beyond, do I have a job tomorrow? That's not ownership. And that's the kind of organization that we want. Last question to you. And this is free text, right? What are your challenges? If you're trying to create this kind of organization, what challenges are you facing? Blame, a culture of blame, culture. I did this with a HR at a HR forum for all of the Asia Pacific HR leads, and the responses there were very interesting. When I ask a group like this, I'm going to guess incentives, fear, yeah. Whereas when I asked the HR forum, their answers were all about people. Culture was a big one, people was another one, incentives, rewards, misaligned frameworks, CXO office. Okay, I'm really intrigued. Now, I don't know if this is a European thing, but there's one word that's missing from that list. When we ran this survey globally, do you want to know what the #1 challenge was? Leadership. I can't even see that on here. That's fantastic. No, seriously, it's really interesting seeing the different kind of responses that different cultures and different organizations provide. Okay, I'll leave that for another minute or two, and let's open up for some questions. That's an entire half-hour conversation in itself. Let me just be very, very specific. So I'll give you two answers. So #1, HR has been underinvested in for the last 30 years. All right, so they're still, from a training perspective, from a thinking perspective, there's been no HR training for your HR teams. Right? They're using tools that are 30 years old. Right? So for HR, it's a matter of just showing them the love. Let them know that things have moved on in 30 years, and we want to invest not just in the organization, but in you as HR. And that's usually a good way of them going, they care about us. Right? Point #2, a lot of the HR policies and procedures that you have are wrong. The most common one is your bonus structure. Bonuses don't work. We've known that for 20, 25 years. If you've been paid at a certain level, there is no evidence to show that a bonus has any incentive or motivating factor. Right? It might keep you in the organization another couple of months to get the bonus, right? But if you're already half out of the organization, that's not the behavior that you want to keep. So for HR, it's about challenging them to think about their policies and procedures. We just published a white paper on incentives and rewards in agile organizations, which it's free to access. I can share a copy with anyone who wants one. And it looks at what are the different, in an agile organization, what does that look like? The next white paper that we're working on, and these are sort of research white papers, we call them wicked white papers because they're wicked problems in that definition, is on recruitment. So how do you actually attract good talent into these organizations without coming back to sort of traditional techniques? Another question. More than you might think, but also less than you might think in different contexts. So Ford Motor Company, right? They had a vision, I'm going back to like 1904, democratize the automobile, right? Which is fine, that kind of makes sense. But then when you think about how they describe that, and this is 1900, so I apologize for the gendered language, we see a future where no man on a good salary cannot afford a car or an automobile to enjoy God's green earth or something like that. Right? That was how they described their vision. And they got everyone behind it, right? From the designers to the manufacturing floor, everybody. So a vision and a mission gives people an orientation, right? But just an orientation. It doesn't give them momentum to take a step in the direction. Right? So a mission gives them orientation, leadership and management and everything else you have is what starts them on the journey as well. So without a strong mission, without that customer, where's my customer? Sorry. No, it's not there. It doesn't matter. Without the customer at the center, right, then I'm just going to do whatever my KPI says that I need to do, which may or may not be the right thing. Mission, make sure I'm doing the right thing, then everything else behind me, make sure I'm on the journey. Thank you very much.